In this video I am sharing with you some of the most powerful tattooing secrets on YouTube. One thing you should know is that you can get the effect of a bigger needle configuration, so thicker lines, but with lighter needles. And we do this by using a round shader. Now notice the needles are aligned flat on the top. This is great for getting those one-pass lines where you don't want to cause much trauma to the skin. It's great for areas where the skin's a little bit thinner. Guys, just go slow with this one as it takes a little bit longer to pack the ink in. Bear in mind that it is harder to get consistent depth with a round shader, but it does result in quite a nice finish. When you're tattooing different areas, gravity isn't always going to be on your side, so you may need to adjust how much the needle is coming out of the machine, aka the throw, or use a longer stroke machine. These round shaders are great for doing thick black work, so as you can see here I'm using the scumbling method to pack in black as well as find the edges at the same time. Guys, as I say, these round shaders are great because they cause much less trauma to the skin than a normal liner. This is due to the spread out needles which create smaller holes in the skin. I'm using a 5 round shader in all of these real skin clips. I also think these are great for detailed colour work and colouring in tight areas. Funnily enough guys, one of the things I don't use the round shader much for is shading, but it is actually a great utility needle. This is a strong bit of advice for you. So one thing you're going to find with a lot of tattoo styles is they need a bit of a less rigid approach to the line work. So what we're going to do is flick out slightly when we're exiting to avoid a hard edge. We're also avoiding contact with the skin until we are moving in the direction we want to place our line. So not using this technique is a bit more forgiving on lower voltages, but if you are holding the machine still for too long, especially on a higher voltage, then you're actually going to get inconsistent lines and dark spots. Guys, just to let you know, you can get 10% off Dragonhawk tattoos if you are looking for your first tattoo machine or your next tattoo machine. Great products, 10% off using code Axel, link is below. Now the next mistake on this list is having an incorrect throw. So the throw is how far the needle hangs out of the cartridge tip. And this can be affected by both gravity and the stroke of your machine. But what a lot of people are doing here is hanging out the needle too far, which drastically affects the ink flow. So as you can see here, I'm really struggling to get the ink to flow out the needle. The needle needs to move in and out of the cartridge slightly to ensure that it picks up the ink, so the stroke is going to affect this a lot. The stroke is how far the needle moves back and forth, guys. Using a shorter throw is going to ensure that plenty of ink is flowing down the needle, especially important if you are tattooing at angles where gravity is not on your side. I mean, with a short throw you could probably tattoo upside down if you wanted to. By the end of this video, I promise you will see an immediate improvement to your line work. One thing that a lot of people are doing wrong is they will line around corners and sharp edges using one motion. Now what this tends to do is affect the angle of the machine, which is going to give you inconsistent line weights on your tattoos. Guys, the secret to crispy lines is to use separate movements as much as possible. This keeps the depth and the angle consistent. So for these leaves we're going to use 2 identical motions. I'm using 6.5 volts here. I'm using a low and slow hand motion technique, but you can adjust this depending on how fast you are and what needles you're using. Using a 5 round liner here. Lots of line work tattoos will have sharp tips like the points of these leaves here, and these are the areas that will be very prone to going badly if you don't use this method. As you can see, this Gothic script has tons of spiky angles, so it's perfect to demonstrate this. So as you can see, I'm stopping and I'm repositioning the machine after every line, after every change of angle. Guys, a couple tips as well when you're tattooing dark skin tones, just make sure you're saturating your lines as much as possible, and the thicker the lines, the better. It's always good practice to move forward as much as possible, and we are using the opening of the cartridge cover as a reference. I'm going to show you an incorrect way of approaching this tattoo. So as you can see, we're moving backwards with the machine unnecessarily, and we're also going over the sharpest point in one motion. So the correct way to approach these leaves is moving forward for consistency, 2 motions for the corner, and by that we are getting 2 sides that are identical in depth and thickness. This is because the angle of the machine is always the same. Now guys, let's move on to the next tip. This is about using your machine at the correct angle. Now a lot of artists like to tattoo quite flat to the surface they're tattooing on. You can get a lot of saturation on your lines this way. You're sort of packing more ink into the dermis, and the more upright the machine, generally the less ink that's getting deposited into the skin and the thinner the lines will be. It's just that your angle needs to be in the same axis of the line that you are tattooing. So if you're coming in low and you're needle is in the opposite axis of the line, coming sideways, your lines are going to come out really thick and chewed up, guys. And as you can see from this clip, this is why beginners will have some lines that look like they're done with a 9-round liner when they're actually done with a 3-round liner. As you can see here, we've got the machine at a slight angle to the direction that we're stroking the machine in, and this creates tighter and more consistent needle hits, giving you more even dots throughout your tattoo. Now you'll be surprised how many artists don't actually know how to do this. Let me show you what happens if you don't tattoo at an angle when using Magnums, and you can see here the machine is just hitting the same area over and over and creating gaps or lines. You can see the dots on the left hand side are much tighter and smoother, so make sure you're applying this method to all of your tattoos. Now in practice the angle doesn't have to be exactly 25 degrees, you don't have to get this perfect. The main idea is that you're not just going over the same place over and over. The same idea is applied to packing in black. 25-degree angle is essential for minimizing gaps in your tattoos. You can also use a more extreme 75-degree angle as well, especially if you're packing in tight areas. Just stick to the same theory. A ton of videos like this on my channel and on the way. Let's do a quick sound test. Now your machine should sound something like this, so it's got a nice hum to it, it's not too aggressive. But let's crank the machine up to 11 volts. Now as you can hear, this is way more aggressive sounding, kind of sounds more like an electric shaver. And this is not what you want for your line work, guys. So one, your lines will wobble because the skin will reject the needle. You might get raised or scarred lines, and this is quite common with a lot of tattoos. The correct way to approach these lines is going to depend on what machine and needle you're using, and just use the sound test to get a feel for it. This is a 3-round liner and we're using a low and slow tattoo technique. I'm using 6.5 volts. So the next tip on this list is to use the edge of the Magnum to get into the nooks and crannies of your tattoo design. So in this clip I am doing it with a curved Magnum, but you can get even more precision if you're using a flat needle configuration. So I've put the machine on its side and I'm just flicking it out to the edges to achieve a solid black transition into my shaded areas, and you can also use this to just lightly shade some corners and bits like that. So as I say, you can use the sides and the edges to shade or colour pack thin areas of your tattoo design where the Magnum wouldn't normally fit. So this is pretty important if you're tattooing hair or fur or anything narrow, kind of flowing like that. So there's a lot of versatility with a Magnum. And another tip as well is using the edge of the Magnum. You can create lines using this as well. So you can use the whole bottom row of the needles like I'm doing here. You can use the corner of the machine and just use a single needle to create a small line. I'm doing this with a curved mag, which is a little bit more tricky, so you need to practice and get used to using this technique. We are going to move on to the next tip now, and this is about how many tones you need for your black and grey. Now you might see some artists using like 10 different tones, and I personally think this is a waste of time, guys. I mean, I use solid black, I use a mid-tone, and I use a light tone. Then I just have plain water, just add a little bit into your cartridge as well to mix it in with your black or your other tone. So you can actually mix the ink inside the cartridge as you go. But guys, next tip now, and this is about using a round liner or a round shader to shade your tattoo, so not just using a Magnum. Mags are good for smooth shading, but they aren't always the most accurate for getting into those little corners or for just giving you a textured effect on your shading. So for this I recommend a round liner or a round shader. Now we'll have other videos soon about how to use these particular needles and what techniques are going to be good for that, so do stay tuned. Please subscribe, do appreciate the support as I say, and I will see you next time.